Well, thank you to Javier, Cynthia, and Daniel for joining me today. MCBA's interview session here. We're going to be highlighting some really fantastic Latino activists that have been helping MCBA and our work across the country and across the world build a bigger movement of Latino activists. And I'm looking forward to being able to share some of them from the Bay Area that have been doing work, over the last couple of years to ensure cannabis equity in their hometowns. And we're going to explore a little bit also what does equity mean to Latinos in the international sense and what's going on with some of the folks in the movement. But I want to kick it off quickly with letting folks introduce themselves from the Bay Area Latino Cannabis Alliance. And we have Daniel, Cynthia, and Javier. And so Daniel, why don't you give us a quick intro of who you are and what brought you to the movement?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Jason. Thank you, MCBA. My name is Daniel Montero, and I wear many hats in the cannabis industry. I actually have over 2 decades worth of experience, my entire adult life, selling cannabis since I was a teenager. And I can say that proudly now. So I'm somebody that I always say I'm coming out of the cannabis closet. And I'll list some of my accomplishments, and then I want to definitely switch gears to why we created BALCA, along with Cynthia and Javier. So I, starting in 2018 as an example, helped to establish the San Jose Cannabis Equity Working Group here in San Jose. And we have successfully lobbied without spending dollars for hopefully what will be a clean implementation of equity in San Jose. I also am proud to say that I've received I'm a recipient of the 2016 Ganjier Award. I'm somebody who's a legacy operator. I've also spent time in jail for cannabis. And if you really want to know more about me, you can Google Daniel Montero, Montero, and click on Google News, and you'll see a lot of cool articles, mainly talking about the equity work in San Jose. And so I also grow cannabis. I also had a delivery service. I have GW Smoke Break TV, which you can check that out on YouTube and on Instagram. But I really do want to focus on BALCA, the Bay Area Latino Cannabis Alliance, something that I'm extremely proud of. We are organizing on a high level, on an intellectual level, the cities of San Jose, San Francisco, and Oakland. And what my comrades are teaching me are that Latinos, we're not a minority, we're a majority in California and around the world. And because we are immigrants, many times we're taught to keep our heads down and not make too much noise. But when we are able to receive the gift of an education, we can use it as a weapon to uplift our communities, Latino communities and our allies. And really what we're looking to do is exactly what our slogan is to empower Latinos through cannabis. And so the reason why we created BALCA is to create that empowerment in a way that will resonate over time, that will see vertical movement for Latinos in the industry. And as you mentioned, Jason, ultimately what we'd love nothing more, and I know Javier will talk about it, but it was Malcolm X's birthday. I believe it was yesterday, 2 days ago. I think maybe 2 days ago. And his legacy was educating African Americans about their roots to Africa and what he felt was the ultimate empowerment of really making that bridge real. And that is a goal of ours, along with working hand in hand with MCBA, to realize those dreams. And as we reach a global economy, we can not only be a part of it, but be a leader for our Latino communities to benefit around the world.
Word, right on, man. Appreciate that. It's an inspiration, and that's why we're here doing this work. So up next, we have Cynthia. Cynthia, introduce yourself and tell us what brought you to the movement and why did you help create BALCA?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having us today. We appreciate being here and are thankful for the opportunity. My name is Cynthia Villamizar, and I am actually more of a new entrant into the cannabis industry. My background is in tech, so I spent the first 6 years of my career working at Google, and towards the end led the transition of Waze, the navigation app, from a US-based operation to a Latin America-based operation in Mexico and in Brazil. So those were just really huge parts of my development as a professional. and a huge part of kind of the beginning of my cannabis experience. And so I transitioned from technology to the cannabis industry about 2 years ago, and I did that from New York. I became really passionate about cannabis wellness and cannabis education and what cannabis can do for anxiety, for depression, for insomnia, specifically for women, but also for young professionals who I think so many times are so blissfully ignorant about how powerful cannabis can really be. And so I launched CynTV, which is a cannabis re-education platform. We do tutorials and events and webinars about cannabis re-education and really introducing cannabis to beginners and people who may be unaware that the industry is rife with innovation and new players and just new research. So CynTV is kind of my passion project and my platform. I also work as the NorCal Director of Sales at Kikoko, which is a cannabis wellness company. We make cannabis tea and honey and mints. And we're the only cannabis company to ever be profiled by Oprah in O Magazine. So we're super proud of that. We're a cannabis company that was founded by women, designed by women, and run by women here out of the Bay Area. So super proud to be a part of that team as well. And then of course, so blessed to work with these guys on BALCA and just bring all of that work into a Latino environment. What I've realized over the past few years of being in the cannabis industry is that this is my life's work, and that my life's work will always be cannabis re-education, and it will always be Latino empowerment. And so I think BALCA is just like the beautiful intersection of that work, and I couldn't be happier to be a part of it.
Right on. I can definitely identify that. I'm a Puerto Rican looking to bring cultivation, to the island, get some economic activity going, and there's a strong political reason to do all of that as well, right? We're here to liberate our people, and cannabis can be one way to help achieve that. So next we have Javier. You're another part of the team. Why don't you tell us about what brought you into the movement and also what inspired you to start BALCA?
Absolutely. Javier Armas. I'm born and raised in Oakland. I have a very long political history of organizing. I was organizing in high school walkouts against prison industrial complex. I've done a lot of immigrant rights organizing, a lot of employment work, a lot of police brutality work, a lot of stuff during Occupy Oakland. And during these social movements in Oakland, one, I was very tied to cannabis. So I would often find cheap cannabis and distribute for free in the social movements. I would link key cannabis people with key social movement people. I just, did it for fun, or, just going to a party or whatever. It was very automatic in a place like Oakland. So for me, social movement politics, organizing against injustice, and the usage of cannabis has always been hand in hand. It's part of, I would say, the Oakland culture. I'm an official Oakland equity applicant business, Javier's Organics. I own a micro license registered on the BCC. I published 18 articles since February 28th on cannabis on a bunch of different topics, from science stuff, open equity funds. And BALCA is very important to me because cannabis is a new industry, and there's a lot of very entitled, rich, white corporate individuals who are trying to shape a culture that resembles their old environments, where Latinos and people of color are second-class citizens, to the modern-day day laborers, the people who are going to pick the flower and deliver the flower, but not really have any power, control, ownership in the company, marketing influence, high-level sales influence. And it's 2020, it's California, it's US, things have to change for sure. And as much as there's been right-wing shift in politics with Trump, cannabis represents its own dynamic social movement politics. And it's really important for Latinos to enter the cannabis industry, develop leadership roles, and, as what's mentioned, engage with America Latina, which has a incredible cannabis movement, Mexico, Colombia, and part of our role is to build that bridge and explain to Americans in the US what's going on in Latin America, and being able to build that bridge, the political impacts we can have, I think, are like tremendous, and no one's doing it. So it's like, we have to do it. You know, we've kind of launched ourselves in that leadership position, and just being able to make really solid impacts locally, Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose. I mean, the state notices, the country notices, and then it doesn't take that much work. You start getting connections across the world. So I know like what we're really doing, fighting against injustice for Latinos in the cannabis industry, is going to have a really big impact.
Absolutely, brother. And it already is, you know, like I would say we have established some connections across the seas. And so, like, for instance, you know, I was able to go to Bogota, Colombia, and meet with Carol Ortega when they had Cannabis over there. And it was just incredible to see the vibrancy of the movement there as well. And so, you know, I'm interested. We're going to talk first a little bit locally about what it's like to be in the Bay Area right now in a Latino, and then we'll shift over to some talk about the international. But I do want to hear, you know, what is it like? You know, there must have been some inspiration for y'all to feel like you needed to pull together and actually do some work together on this particular issue as Latinos. And so tell me a little bit more about what the work is like now. Where are we at with cannabis equity and Latinos when it comes to the Bay Area? Are we in a good spot? Is there work to still do? We'll use the same speaking order. We'll start with Daniel, then Cynthia, and then Javier. And be sure to unmute yourself if you are speaking.
Thank you, Jason. So the question was the current state of equity and Latinos in the Bay Area?
Or Latinos in the Bay Area in regards to their ability to participate in the industry, get out of prison, and are our communities benefiting from legalization?
Yes. Okay, it's a fantastic question. I think it's a long process, and who's already on the racetrack is Oakland and San Francisco. It's brave to be an equity applicant at this time, not just with the pandemic, but California cannabis in general. It's chaotic. The taxes are high. You guys know that song. And so part of our work is continuing to educate and continuing to evolve opportunity as the industry evolves, because what we're seeing is that equity isn't something that's set in stone, meaning that we're seeing additional funds being granted to equity applicants across the state. We're seeing different directions being made so that ultimately California can meet what they want, and that's the tax revenue that they projected, which is on a steady decline. And everyone at the table is realizing that we need Latinos, we need African Americans, we need those who actually are a mirror reflection of the California consumer before legalization. And the mistake that many new participants in our industry are doing is targeting a demographic of consumer that will not sustain their anticipated expectations when it comes to making money. So right now, what we're seeing, as Javier mentioned, a lot of lower positions being had by Latinos. We're seeing the slow takeoff of equity in San Francisco and in Oakland. And because they were first on the racetrack, there are inherent problems to be resolved. In San Jose, we're very optimistic, but we have yet to even hit the races. That's 9-12 months out for us. And so I think that through education, we can empower our youth to participate and apply their college degrees in the cannabis industry. Because again, what everybody knows is that our industry has attracted the most aggressive businessmen, some of the sharpest minds, and unfortunately, the impulse was mainly for dollars. And so for those of us that have been in this world before legalization, our relationship with the plant is so much more than that. And it's that love, it's that empowerment, it's that better quality of life, and I can go on. But really, love is a good way to summarize that. That who doesn't want to be a part of a more loving world, or of a world where you can say, I love, this planet in this case.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Well, actually, I'm going to kick it over to Cynthia, because Cynthia came at this not from the movement and the love of the plant, right? And so came out of from a more corporate environment. And so what can we learn, and what has your experience been like in that transition now as a Latina in the industry? And what is it like operating in this space here in 2020?
Yeah, well, I would say that I do come from a corporate background and experience, but I am in the industry for a love of the plant. I think that to succeed in this industry, I agree wholeheartedly that your heart does need to be in conjunction in the right place. Like you need to understand the power of the plant for community and for wellness. The transition as an industry player has been unique. Like it's definitely a totally different place. Like the rules are totally different. Everything is completely different. Um, and I started at a completely different angle. Like I definitely started in this industry from the bottom, like learning from literally building an Instagram page to working at Kikoko as a brand ambassador. So I definitely feel like I have understands like what it takes on the ground level to work in the cannabis industry, although it is entirely different. And I will say that from the Latino perspective, there's a lot of work to be done. So obviously, I'd say first and foremost in the Bay Area as Latinos in cannabis, one of the biggest hurdles that we faced is that we didn't know each other. And that really was like the launching point for BALCA. Was I moved to the Bay Area for the second time. I moved here originally in 2012, and then I moved again back to the Bay Area in 2018. And the second time around, I was in the cannabis industry. The first time around, I was in tech, second time in cannabis. And about 6 months in, moving from New York this time, I definitely didn't feel like I had my Latino group, my Latino core, and like that base that in cities like New York is just so abundant. It's everywhere. And it's everywhere here too. But in the cannabis industry, I don't think that we were necessarily a union and had that tight of a community. And so that was really the launching point for a lot of this work, was just getting to know each other and create that community. From the equity program perspective, there's obviously a lot of gaps in what could be done with the equity program, but because the conversation is so focused on the equity program, a lot of times we don't focus on everything below cannabis ownership, which is also just building up these startups, climbing the ladder, like being a bud tender and working your way up to being a buyer. And all of those experiences in this industry are also incredibly valid. They are also working towards generational wealth. And that is another giant piece of BALCA's work, is making sure that we don't just focus on cannabis ownership, cannabis business ownership, which although is like obviously so important, is equally important to like all this work that we're doing on the ground level.
For sure, yeah. And labor issues are becoming more and more prevalent when it comes to cannabis in the industry, and figuring how we're going to protect our folks that are working in the industry. And, I think we're going to have so many different movements now are going to also join us and apply the knowledge that they've gained in other spaces that will shift, how we look at the cannabis movement now too. And I think, Javier, I think you're a perfect person to talk a little bit about that, coming from lots of different issue-based backgrounds. And so what has it been like in Oakland? It's definitely, Oakland has been that space that does sort of show the rest of the world how it's done and put some examples on paper. Oakland definitely was a big inspiration for MCBA's model policy and all of the work that's happened in the Bay Area. So it had tremendous ripple effects for us. But what is it like in Oakland in 2020? How do you feel like the cannabis industry is, or ecosystem, I should say, is doing at this moment?
I mean, it's Oakland equity movement is super interesting. It's an issue that's very dear to my heart. Oakland's the first one to launch an equity program. They licensed over 100 equity businesses. There's literally around 100 Oakland equity delivery services. So, the movement's very large and it's very telling. I own a micro license. You can look me up on the BCC. So there's a very progressive element about giving out these licenses to people who deserve it. But once you get the license, that doesn't mean you're going to have success. The regulations are so serious and daunting. You need a cargo van. The compliance is very demanding. So it takes serious operating capital to build a business, even if you get your licenses for free. And it's only the city licenses that you get for free. The BCC of the state of California doesn't waive any fees. But nevertheless, there's a strong movement. There's a lot of people that are proud of the equity movement, a lot of Black folks, a lot of people of color, a good amount of Latinos in Oakland. And I'm always trying to encourage us to unite in some type of way that we can all fight for each other as a grouping. Because if we think about developing some type of division of labor for the market, these groups go after this other group goes after that, we all work together, we can compete against against some of the big names. That has not been happening, right? So that's a certain difficulty. Coupled with, if a lot of the big names are treating young Latinos and Latino immigrants in a problematic way, like other industries, working for 8.5 hours and only getting paid 8, not getting reimbursed for your driving, missing your last paycheck, not getting a real lunch break. The white admin folks get an hour lunch break, but you only get 15 minutes, which is a labor violation. So these things are happening, and no one wants to rock the boat or push the envelope. And no one wants to do it as an individual because you don't want to get fired. So BALCA is a very powerful institution where we're going to utilize it as an organization to fight for Latinos in the industry that are subject to some of these injustices. One of our 5 points of unity is full civil rights, and the other one's professional development. So if someone is getting marginalized, bullied, subject to discrimination, we're going to challenge that. And California has very powerful civil rights laws to give us backbone to do it. And then we want to develop that individual, right? In order to climb the ranks of any organization, any company, you do have to have skills. And we want to help develop those skills because we know they're not offered. So that's another key point of what we stand for. So those are two dynamic things that we're doing that's below business ownership, but could help lead to business ownership. So they come together as like a strong ecological system. And our other 2 points of unity is cultural expression and community education. And that's like talking to our community as a whole, being able to connect to Dia de los Muertos and other key cultural events that are tied to us and we don't see the cannabis industry connected to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to switch gears a little bit to actually talk a little more about the international space. As some of you all know, MCBA has been working to organize an Asamblea and still in the works. We were going to hope for an in-person event here this summer, but obviously we're going to have to push that back a little bit. But Daniel was part of the opening crew that helped us put that together. And so now we are trying to form, that platform for stateside Latinos and international and Latin American born or residing Latinos to talk to each other. And so as we develop that, we want to reach out to folks like yourselves to see, well, what would an ideal grouping and gathering of Latinos in the cannabis industry look like? What would it include? How can we make sure that we are touching on all the touch points that we really want to make sure are addressed? And I want us to start to visualize what that reaching out to our Latin American brothers and sisters would actually look like. And so we'll start with Daniel. How do you think that stateside Latinos can more effectively organize with our brothers and sisters in our home countries now or in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I think the more interactivity that we can have through these Zoom calls, through social media, it's setting up the foundation for what is inevitably going to become a global economy. Work for us is educating those that are in power here in the Bay Area. So I can speak about the San Jose equity movement, and I'm really comfortable in saying that we have a positive working relationship with our city council members, with city staff, and it's necessary in order to see an implementation roll out correctly and as envisioned. And so for you're talking in this case, presidents of countries like Puerto Rico, you're talking about Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, a whole continent, which is South America. And but by continuing to educate those that are in power, financial power, business and politics go hand in hand, we can educate them to understand that as this industry becomes a global force to be reckoned with, Latino America can be a dominant group in the global economy. As an example, in Africa, they are mobilizing to be a major global producer of hemp at low cost of production, and South America can also participate on that level. And by acknowledging that we are a global culture as Latinos, by acknowledging the history that we have with this plant, I think it will help to establish a positive future where, again, we maximize long-term economic benefit, but without the education behind it, which with the San Jose Equity Fund, where we're looking to have a more equitable distribution of city resources and services, without the education of our city leaders before trying to roll out that implementation, we can't expect for that to roll out correctly. So what we're talking about is real revolution, giving, as an example in Bolivia, it was and continues to be in many ways a third world country. And Javier has got me reading about the Bolivian Revolution. It's called Rebellion in the Veins. And so we see an indigenous group of people with no education rise up and come to power. And we're still having that conversation because there's still an incredible amount of injustice, which was originally perpetrated by this country. What I'm talking about is the war on drugs. And so it puts a bad taste in our mouths. And once we can help our people understand that we can empower ourselves and better ourselves with this plant that has been demonized by the Anglo, then we can move forward in a solid way together globally.
Right on, yeah. The Anglos have definitely perpetuated a significant number of crimes in Latin America and North America, and I think it is time that we actually start to write those down and quantify what it would look like to heal the damage done by the war on drugs. It's been a worldwide war on communities of color and poor people, and just like we think about it here in the States, that we should admit that the government committed a racially motivated crime against our communities and offer restitution for that. Same thing should apply at an international level, right? I think the difference is, what does that look like, right? And how do we actually get the federal government to admit that crime? But I think that's what we're here to do, right? We're here to do that work. And I'm going to kick it over to Cynthia. So what do you think are some ways that folks here in the States can reach out back to our home countries? And actually, a little bit more about all of y'all's backgrounds, where you're from, where your family's from, might be good context here too, as we shift into thinking about what does international equity look like?
Yeah, I love that. Oh, I love that question. So just for context on who I am and how it relates to my answer, I was born in Miami, so one of the most Latino places. Where I grew up in Miami is 98% Cuban. We were just a very Latino place. My dad is from Colombia and my mom is from Ecuador, and they met salsa dancing in Miami. So just like very much a Latino upbringing. And my family moved to Tennessee when I was 12. So like right in my awkward adolescence, and full on braces, like so awkward, terrible, and just obviously a very different culture than where I grew up. And so I've spent most of my life thinking about Latino identity and what it means to not be from here and be from there. And like when you were in Miami, you were Latino enough, but now that you're here, you're not, or you were too much. And there's always just kind of like a gauge of where you stand in that Latino-ness. It's a lifelong battle, especially for Latinos in the US. So working through the Latino identity in the cannabis industry is very special. It'll be lifelong work because we're all going to be in this for the rest of our lives. So we'll always be working on this. And just based on my personal experience, I'd say that the most connecting that needs to be done between us in the US and Latinos and cannabis in Latin America is just a lot of storytelling and communicating, and to Daniel's point, educating. So as BALCA, we're so passionate about this newsletter that we want to launch. We're so passionate about making sure that we have Latin America voices in that we're telling their stories as well. A lot of our work has to do with profiling Latinos in cannabis in the Bay Area, which we've started to do and we're so proud of. But our long-term vision is to tell the stories of Latinos in cannabis in Latin America. We're excited to meet these people in like this newer digital age. Like we're excited to do these types of Zooms with them. Like we've talked about doing farm tours. If people in Colombia and other countries are harvesting, we want to see that. And if it's not possible for us to go in person, then we want to do that digitally. And then something that is more like specific, but that I've really started to think about lately is the disconnect between Latinos in the US being so educated on cannabis, but being so in English, and how impactful it would be if we actually could speak our knowledge equally in Spanish. And so the impact of just like having that bilingual dialogue between us and Latin America-based cannabis industry folks, and just like teaching each other the vocabulary that's necessary for us to thrive. cross-continent.
Yeah, the language barrier is a perpetual one. As a Connecticut-born Puerto Rican, right? Like, identity has always been a complicated thing, whether I'm aquí or allá, you know, like, it's definitely, there's no simple solution. You never really get closure, right? It's just something you have to deal with at all times.
Forever. It's whatever you decide for yourself.
Right. And I've actually been an organizer with the organization called the National Puerto Rican Agenda. I was the president of the Connecticut Puerto Rican Agenda. And I remember people challenging if I was Puerto Rican enough, right, to be able to say what Puerto Ricans want, right? And so who gets to speak for the movement or our communities, and who shouldn't be speaking for our communities, right? Like, that's, again, an amorphous question, just as much as coming up with policies like things like equity, and then having to translate that into a second language where we're still figuring out what it means in English, you know? And so it's very, very complicated, but juicy work that we can be doing just in terms of understanding what these terms mean, how we would express that in a Colombian legislature versus, Panamanian one, right? Like, they even have just their own different legal situations from our histories of colonialism that we have to deal with, all these different mixing of all of it, right? And be able to share best practices. But Javier, I'm going to ask you a little bit more on what you think cannabis equity would look like in the international space, especially coming from such a progressive background. I'm sure you have some ideas of what we can learn from what we've done in the States, but also do it even more effectively for impacted communities in Latin America.
Totally. Yeah. So I'm born here. My dad's from El Salvador. My mom's half Mexican, half Armenian. And my family has a long political history, including El Salvador, very active in the FMLN. And I've been in touch with all my cousins who actually got involved with Ideas Nuevas, which is the party of Nayib Bukele, the president. And so when we hit recreational legalization January 1st, 2018 in California, I wrote them a letter in Spanish. I told all my cousins, I was like, mira que estamos haciendo aquí en California con la legalización, and just made a really big deal. And there's a lot of salvadoreños in California. It's a really strong bridge. So that was definitely kind of a natural pulse I had at that moment. And then I have friends in Mexico City who I communicated somewhat about this. And obviously, if I had more money and more time, I would just love to just hop on a plane and do international organizing and try to get that stuff more off the ground. And I went to Argentina, Chile, Venezuela back in 2000, 2004, that period. There's all these strong social movements. Argentina overthrew 6 presidents during their economic crisis. I was visiting Latin America during that whole time, visiting occupied factories, just getting, in my early 20s, just meeting very political Latino revolutionaries. And at the end of every night, tienes mota, sí, we all smoke, it's just all naturally and organically part of our culture. So I would just love to connect with really important, organizers, the social movements in Latin America, and connect on the level of cannabis. Is just, we're just limited. We're trying to build BALCA on the Bay Area. We're trying to, connect with you nationally. And then there's a lot to do in America Latina. And the stuff in Mexico is huge, obviously. It's our big neighboring country. It's big for California. They can produce, we have great organic agriculture that comes from North Mexico. So the question of Mexico is really big. And then the question of Colombia is really big because they have a very developed cannabis culture, a lot of unique strains that are native to Colombia. They have some really rich histories that have never been translated in English that I'm interested in. So there's a lot of work that we could and should do as far as building those roots. And they're facing criminalization. They're facing very similar problems, and it's backed by the U.S. So we also have a role of challenging the U.S. and stopping the criminalization of countries of America Latina that are pushing these same policies. So it's definitely a passionate issue for sure. I don't feel like I've done enough, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think any of us have, right? Even being able to go over there and visit and see it, live, it was inspiring for me, but I didn't offer as much as I could have back, right? To be able to share what we can bring down to them. It's always a one-directional relationship with the United States, even when we're in best of intentions. But shout out to Carol Ortega for pulling me and pulling other folks to Colombia to see what they're doing over there. It is very advanced. I do also encourage folks to Google Plan Colombia so you can get some context of the history of what we've done to that country, because when you see how robust the movement still is, you know, despite that level of oppression, it's quite an inspiration. And so I do want to give folks a chance to figure out how they can get most involved with BALCA here in the States. But I also just want to plug another group that I've been working with that's a similar thing that we're going to have on next time, which was the Coalition Canábica Caribeña de Puerto Rico. And so shout out to Francis Gonzalez from Latinas Cannapreneurs. But they're starting a coalition of folks in the Caribbean, starting in Puerto Rico, around cannabis justice. So the more we can plug people into these different groups wherever they are, the better. So if you're in Puerto Rico, just shout out to Francis Gonzalez, check him out. Raul, we have a lot of good folks. I'm in Montoya on board, so please do check it out. But before we wrap up, I want to give folks a chance to see how do we get in touch with BALCA, your website, and how can folks get involved if they're either in the area or internationally, but they want to support your work. We'll start with Daniel.
Yes. So what I do want to say is if you want to support BALCA and participate, all you have to do is follow us on Instagram is BALCA_Bay Area. And before I lose my train of thought, I was actually doing some reading the other day and I learned a new word. And the word is latent. I actually had to put it on Google to find out how to pronounce it. But the way I see our Latino people, and BALCA being that we're a nascent organization, we are visionaries. Cynthia reinforced that for us, that we are implementing our vision. But what the word latent means is to be in dormancy until the time is right to manifest yourself. And so that's what I see for us. And I think that's a good way to conclude, how I feel about our work and our power as Latinos. But please reach out to us on Instagram. Our website is coming, our newsletter is coming, and we're looking to build strong working relationships that will have value over time.
Right on. Thank you so much. Cynthia, how can folks either here or allá help your organizing?
No, Daniel hit it right on the head. That's what he did. Yeah, he did. BALCA_Bay Area. We're on Instagram, and all of our things will be built up. Daniel is GW Smoke Break. I'm CynTV. Javier is at Javier's Organics. Those are our personal Instagrams, but we're building from there. Great.
And Javier, how can we support your work? How can we buy your products? I don't know if your doors are open, but feel free to let us know how we can support Latino-owned business.
Yeah, just what Daniel and Cynthia said. Definitely check out BALCA. We got a lot of infrastructure coming. My micro license is definitely in motion, and I'm going to be coming out with some really cool products. So definitely reach out to us, and we got some cool stuff in the pipeline for sure.
Right on. So, yeah, and if folks want to get more involved with MCBA, we're at minoritycannabis.org. We have lots going on. I'm going to put out there the Asamblea that we're working on. If you're someone in Latin America or have connections to folks in Latin America, you want to help us develop what social equity could mean in an international context, you can reach me at jason@minoritycannabis.org. Or any of our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, you'll be able to find us. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you very much to the folks at BALCA. We're looking forward to working with you, and of course, count MCBA in as an ally and accomplice for whatever the work is that you're going to be doing.
Thanks so much, Jason, for having us.
Thanks for having us, Jason. Appreciate it.
Gracias, Jason.
Gracias a ti. Thank you so much.